Welcome to Larry the Alchemist, and on today's episode, let's discuss Ratt and their 2010 album Infestation. This is their first album. It was their first album in 11 years. It was the first album without Robin Crosby, who had sadly passed away. It was their first album with Carlos Cavazo from Quiet Riot fame on second guitar. It had Stephen Pearcy on vocals from the classic era of Ratt. We had Stephen Pearcy, Warren DeMartini on guitar, Bobby Blotzer on drums, and Robbie Crane on bass, taking the place of Juan Crucier from that classic era. Kind of hard to believe that they never used that title, Infestation, before this. So it's a very classic sounding 80s Ratt sounding album title, and the album has a very classic Ratt sound to it, especially in the songwriting. It's produced by Michael Elvis Baschetti, who also gets in on a lot of the writing credits on pretty much most of the songs. He gets writing credit. This is my big gripe with this record, is with the production. I mentioned earlier that it has a very classic Ratt sound to it, but that for me is mostly in the songwriting. Unfortunately, the production on this record, it's a classic example of a victim of the loudness wars. You've heard me talk about the loudness wars on here, things being overcompressed, dynamically squashed, and the result of that is you get this kind of like splattered sound where there's not a lot of separation in the guitars. Everything just seems kind of smeared and splattered. It's very fatiguing. And this album really suffers from that, which is a shame because I think that the songwriting and the songs and the performances on here are great. This sounds like an album that could have followed Invasion of Your Privacy. I mean, it is very rarely do bands from this era are they able to recapture the magic of their early years. But this album does that. Unfortunately, it's sabotaged from a certain degree by the overcompressed production of the record. Typically, overcompressed albums like this, I would subtract 1 point from my final total, but in this case, I got to subtract 2 points because it really, unfortunately, is a distraction at points. And by the time you get to the end of this record, there's some serious ear fatigue going on. But like I said, it really in the songwriting department has a real classic vibe to it. Stephen Pearcy sounds whatever you think of Stephen Pearcy. If you didn't think he was that great of a singer in the 80s, he sounds like Stephen Pearcy from the 80s. He doesn't really sound like he's lost a step here. Warren DeMartini, classic riffs all over. It's hard for me to say how much Carlos Cavazo. He gets in on the songwriting credits here, so maybe he was involved in some of the riff writing, but it sounds like a classic Ratt. Maybe it's missing a little bit of Juan Crucier's background vocals, which were a big part of the early stuff. But for me, it's the production, man. I so wish that they could have produced this more like the 80s stuff where you got these nice, distorted, but clean in the sense of you can hear everything in the production, classic, big sounding drums and everything. A lot of the stuff just gets sort of eaten up and sucked in by this overcompressed mix. I will say that Ratt has always had really consistent albums. When I think of these bands from the whole LA glam scene, a lot of them are very inconsistent. Quiet Riot, first album, great, and then they start going downhill. Although I do sort of like Condition Critical. Motley Crue, they're all over the place. Dokken, once you get out of the classic era there, first run with George Lynch, the stuff gets really inconsistent. But that's not the case with Ratt. Their catalog is very consistent all the way through. There's some albums that are better than others, of course, and I've done some rankings on Ratt. I'll try to remember to link those down below. But for the most part, they're consistent throughout their catalog. They don't have any really, really big stinkers. So the album opens with "Eat Me Alive," and the opening riff right away, you're like, we're in vintage Ratt territory here. The opening riff reminds me of "You're in Love." It's upbeat. It's got that kind of down tune chugging off the open string type vibe. Stephen Pearcy sounds good in it. The chorus is real catchy. Best of Me, maybe my favorite song on the record. It's very upbeat, very catchy, melodic rock, major key sounding. This would have been a massive video hit if this was the 80s. You can just picture the video, them goofing around backstage, girls running up on stage, hugging them, like a classic 80s glam, LA glam metal video. Great pre-chorus. I love the pre-chorus in this. You never told me that you've been in. Reminds me of Unchained, the pre-chorus in Unchained. All right, next, A Little Too Much. Classic Ratt groove. Very good chorus to it. Look Out Below has that bluesy, funky kind of Way Cool Junior vibe to it. Some really nice lead playing in it. The whole record, you can hear moments where you can hear them kind of touching on classic Ratt stuff, and this one is a good example of that. Look Out Below, because it has that Way Cool Junior vibe, which was a pretty big hit for them, I would say. Last Call, twisted blues riff, reminds me of something like that Eddie Van Halen might have done on Diver Down. Lost Weekend, heavy downtune riff bouncing off the open string, again that kind of You're in Love type of vibe. Nice sleazy 80s sounding type of chorus, partying, womanizing, that kind of stuff. As good as it gets, mid-tempo, heavy feeling. It's got it reminds me of Wanted Man. It's kind of amazing, man. Pretty much every song on this record is good. I mean, some are a little bit better than others. I would say Garden of Eden and Take a Big Bite, they're a little bit repetitive, and by this point in the record it's starting to sound a little bit repetitive, but there's no really big clunkers on here, and really up to the first 5 songs in this record are really strong, catchy riffs, catchy melodies, catchy choruses, good vocals, good hooks. Pretty impressive for a band at this point in their career to put out an album that's this good. Like I said, if this was followed Invasion of Your Privacy, there would have been 2 or 3 hits off this, and it would have been all over MTV. It could have followed that and not seemed out of place. Take Me Home is a nice, I don't know if I'd call it a ballad, but it's slower. The verses, he's Steven singing in a little bit of a lower range. The guitars sort of clean up a little bit. It's a nice variation at this point from the rest of the record. I personally would have moved this up earlier ahead of Garden of Eden and Take a Big Bite, because by the time those come up, you're sort of getting a little tired of the same tempos, these sort of faster type tempos. So Take Me Home is a nice variation from that. Don't Let Go, last song on the record, at least on my CD version. I bought this CD version when it came out. I think on streaming there's an extra song or two. Kind of a standard Ratt fast number. It's good. The chorus is good. Unfortunately, the compressed production of this record doesn't do it any favors. So, all right, what do you guys think of Ratt Infestation? What a good title. How did they not use his title in the 80s? I think it's a fantastic comeback. I mean, my gosh, at this point in their career, to put out an album that sounds this good, that's this catchy, that sounds like classic Ratt, very impressive. What do you think of the production, though? I don't like this production, and it sort of takes away from it for the whole thing. But the songs make up for it. It's a fun record. It's got that Ratt and roll vibe to it. So a very impressive sort of comeback album of sorts for them. Let me know what you think of it in the comments down below. Till we see you again, make sure you stay heavy, stay metal.